Welcome to Ground Rules, Employment Law Over Your Coffee Break. My name's Pam Howland, and I'm here today with Jennifer Walrath, Doug Plass, and today we have a special guest with us, Michelle Choate. And Michelle is a keynote speaker, emotional intelligence and executive team coach, an organization development consultant with 25 years of experience in organizational culture, individual and leadership development. Michelle helps people master their self-leadership, effectively taking back their power and maximizing their influence in complex, volatile work environments. Okay, we're familiar with those, right, everybody? Emotional intelligence is one of Michelle's focuses, and that's the foundation of her approach to increase self-compassion, self-awareness, and impact. And that's why we've asked Michelle to come talk to us today, is because we want to learn more about emotional intelligence. And as employment lawyers and people with a compliance focus, we want to talk a little bit about how emotional intelligence intersects with compliance issues, which is what we see day in and day out. So, Michelle, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then tell us a little bit more about emotional intelligence. Help us understand that concept a little bit better.
Sure. Well, thanks, first of all, for having me. I think this is a really interesting dovetail. In the background of emotional intelligence, there's a lot of social psychology and neurobiology, and I think that's something people don't understand or recognize. When we talk about emotional intelligence, we're not just talking about the squishy, soft stuff like empathy, which is a part of it. It's only a slice of it. It's actually a part of our social development, and it's a biological response. So if you think about emotional intelligence, at its heart is our ability to recognize when we or someone else is experiencing an emotion and to use that information in a productive and effective way. So qualities of emotional intelligence include things like emotional self-awareness. Ooh, I'm feeling. And I can name the feeling. Emotional self-management. Oh, I'm feeling a strong feeling. And I can manage myself behaviorally while I'm having that feeling. Qualities like self-compassion, for example. Ooh, I'm feeling badly. That doesn't make me bad. Empathy, which isn't the soft and squishy. It's me being able to say, Jennifer, I notice you're feeling. And be able to say that in a way that opens the door for greater understanding rather than closes the door based in fear. Assertiveness can be a quality of emotional intelligence. Interpersonal relationships, stress management, and other stress qualities like resilience come from our ability to be emotionally intelligent. I think a super easy example of what it looks like is, I'm sitting in my office and my boss walks in and says, hey, can I talk to you a minute, and closes the door. So I have this moment of surprise, right? Unexpectedness. Now, what happens biologically is I have an emotion, and the emotion is, oh, my stomach tightens up, and maybe my heart rate starts to increase. That's the emotion. But then my brain starts to do all of this stuff simultaneously, trying to make sense of why my boss just walked in, because they didn't give me information. Simply, hey, can you talk a minute, and closes the door. And so my brain goes, wait a second. Why would they be here? Did I turn in my report? It was due Tuesday. I got it in. Oh, wait, did I say something bad to Sally again? I didn't mean to do that. Oh, is it my fault? Did I forget to make the coffee? And so we start to make up all of these reasons why my boss is there, and which starts to heighten the physical feeling, the emotion. And then I attach a meaning to the physical feeling. So I have all these feelings, and suddenly I'm like, ooh, I'm scared. And that's the feeling. And the fear is what we often then respond to behaviorally. So now I'm afraid. So, hey, what's happening? Hey, what did I do? What could I do better? What did I make a mistake? Am I in trouble, right? So I start to behave defensively. And now my behavior creates anxiety for me. Now my boss is feeling anxious, and I'm experiencing that. And so we end up with the potential of flipping over into what's called fight or flight, or freeze or fawn. It's been expanded, the behavior sets. And once that happens, I lose my capacity to reason. My body actually has a system in it called the amygdala. It's in my brain, and it will override critical thinking. So you might have heard of an amygdala hijack. I no longer can reason. I can only respond to the chemicals that are flooding my body in that moment, which are adrenaline, and they cause me to behave in ways that are unproductive. So emotional intelligence is increasing that gap between that stimulus, my boss walking in and asking me a question, and my response, oh my gosh, I'm afraid, I need to defend myself, and being able to say, oh, my boss walked in, he has a right to walk in, it's his building. And of course he can ask me questions. In fact, my job is to make him look good. I'm really curious why he's here. Instead of being afraid, I move to maybe asking questions or some other behavior that's more productive. So there's a really quick primer on EQ. How does that, as you in your own work, like how do you see that come forward, and what other questions do you have about it in practice?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that came to my mind is I feel like we deal with a lot of issues where maybe an employee uses terms or phrases like, I don't feel safe, or I feel anxiety, or, I'm anxious about what's going to happen. And another thought that crossed my mind is we get called in to do workplace investigations when an employer might have a high-level leader who's accused of being that overly assertive. You use the word assertiveness. That one kind of hit with me. Maybe someone who is perceived by people in the workplace as being too strong of a leader, too direct. I feel like whenever we get called in to investigate a leader who's too direct, that's not really used in a positive connotation with that, which in some ways you're like, well, I don't know, like there is something to be said for being direct.
The clearest kind.
Yeah. So thinking about the intersection between employment law, compliance, and even workplace investigations, where we go in and really try to uncover what's going on when someone's complaining that someone's maybe even a bully, too direct, too assertive, and how that can spin into some type of employment law complaint.
Right, the potential for risk. Yeah. What I think is interesting in organizations is so often people are advanced because they have a technical skill or they have tenure and are not given the leadership qualities or skills, or they're not innately within them to help them assimilate to a new role and expectation. Leadership is about influence. It's about motivating. It's about engaging. It's not about making people do or forcing people to be. Now, if you've been rewarded through your own professional advancement by doing that well, it's very hard to change that behavior because the reward system in your brain says, well, if I just tell him louder, he's going to do it. And so, unfortunately, the organization doesn't set people up to necessarily be successful. I so often hear of just sink or swim as a leadership competence development. Emotional intelligence can be developed, but only with awareness. So people have to recognize when those behaviors that they've been exhibiting, which are habit, are actually no longer going to serve them in the function that they are now in. So calling people out on that has to be focused on behavior, not necessarily intention, because I think my intentions are good. My intentions are to drive organizational outcomes, to see you be successful in your work. It's not the intention that gets misunderstood, it's the behavior attached to the intention. So one thing that I really like to explore with leaders who are struggling with their expression of things like assertiveness is to recognize that there's a spectrum of potential behavior between being kind and being assertive that they can access and create a balance between those responses. Neither is necessarily right or wrong. It's the balanced response in emotional intelligence that we seek, so that you're managing for habits or patterns that are maybe not conscious, and intentionally instead choosing behaviors that are more productive. And that's why knowing your own emotion, well, for example, like a leader who has come up and their assertiveness has served them well, if someone asks them a question and now they're in a leadership position and they have positional power, that question might feel like a threat. And in their mind, wait, why are they questioning me? I'm the boss. They're supposed to do what I say. And so the behavioral response isn't productive. An emotionally intelligent leader is going to go, whoa, they're asking me a question. Well, that means maybe I haven't been clear, or maybe there's more information they're seeking. Or maybe there's something else I don't understand. So instead of just reacting emotionally, they reflect on what they experience and then approach it with a different mindset.
Mm-hmm. Jen, Doug, anything triggering with you guys?
Well, what was coming to my mind as you guys were having this discussion is, because we're big on training here, right? We're big on compliance training, and for supervisors, to be able to, spot legal issues, address them early, like loop in HR early, get help. And part of what we always talk about too is like performance management, right? And like really documenting. And as you're talking, I'm just thinking, and of course this is not our wheelhouse, but what you're discussing is sort of an additional tool in the toolkit to have a good, useful discussion with employees when you have to do things like the annual performance review, or have a discussion about a performance problem, or, hey, yesterday you and Sally had a conversation that Sally did not appreciate, and we need to have a talk about that. And coming to a place on the other side where both people in that conversation had the same conversation, right? And people perceived it similarly is kind of the goal, right? Because where we see that sometimes is that discussion doesn't quite go right, and people come away with different understandings of what was talked about or what the expectations are coming out the other side. So what you're talking about, I think, would be helpful for everyone in that conversation, but especially the leaders to have a better understanding of. And probably all of us, even if we're good at this, can benefit from learning more, right? To really have that good discussion, because it's going to be better from a compliance perspective, which is what we focus on, but also going to be better just for the organization, which, an employee happiness, work quality, all of which also helps with compliance, right? Happy employees are not typically going to be, I don't hesitate to say causing problems, right? But like, it's good to have people who are happy at their job, doing a good job, work well with their coworkers, work well with their supervisors, et cetera.
You got me thinking about kind of a pattern that I see a lot, which is there's some problem with an employee, and this employee is particularly reactive, I guess is how I would describe the people we typically see. And I'm having a conversation with a leader, and the focus is, can I do this? And I don't know. I always kind of, as a lawyer, my inclination is just to answer yes or no. But what I always start thinking is, well, what's going to happen if you do that? How are they going to react? So I think there's a lot of this that is kind of baked into what we do in terms of how we counsel people and how we have them consider the situations that they're in and that they're putting themselves in by their actions.
Yeah, I think you're calling people to a higher level of emotional intelligence so that they can think rationally and critically about the experience that they're creating for their teams and for themselves through their own behavior. And when other people are behaving, that it's a reflection of something that they can deepen their understanding about. Something I say probably 5 times a week is emotions are simply data. That's all they are. When I see you having an emotion, that all that tells me is something in the environment is causing you to feel. And my job then is to uncover that. What is it about the environment or context? How can I help you understand more clearly what it is you're feeling? And I can use good questions and presence, my own emotional intelligence through reflective practice, seems like that was an upsetting statement for you. And just have people test that way. One thing I hear so often that surprises me, and I don't know why it does, but I think it's an important kind of nuance to organizational behavior, is emotions don't belong at work, when the bulk of our decision making is based in emotion. So when we say don't bring your emotions to work, basically we're saying your feelings aren't valid. And when I have a feeling, I have to either deny it or rewrite it in my brain to justify my feeling and then my bad behavior, which means I'm not being kind of honest with myself. And by taking the emotions out, we turn it into a skill set that people don't get to practice very often. So it becomes conflict management when it's really emotional management. And I think that nuance is something that, when I get to go deeper into an organization, I really try to make that a part of the ongoing discussion. Is you're not managing conflict, you're managing people having feelings, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. We're human, right? AI hasn't totally taken over. We can still have an emotion. Yeah. Another thing that was crossing my mind is and this might sound familiar to those of you who've been listening to the podcast, is we've had some recent developments in the law. We have this relatively new U.S. Supreme Court case, the Muldrow versus City of St. Louis case, which we're really just starting to see the fallout from that case since it's a little over a year old. But it really has lessened the standard that an employee needs to bring in order to prove a discrimination claim. So where an employee used to have to show some type of substantial harm, the threshold now for an employee to bring a claim is just some harm. And thinking about all the things we've been talking about, like conflict with a boss and an employee maybe feeling anxious or like they're in a workplace where they don't feel safe, are those type of things going to be interpreted at some point by courts as some harm? And to me, that's just going to make this type of issue more and more important for employers to recognize and to provide tools for their leaders on how they can incorporate some of the concepts you're talking about.
Yep, I agree. I think in reflecting on what it takes to be an emotionally intelligent leader, there also has to be cultural supports for that, and that the rewards system is set up to validate and affirm the behavior when you are emotionally intelligent. So do you hire for emotional intelligence? You can there are behavioral interviewing question sets specifically for how do you interact with people, your interpersonal skill sets. When an event set created an emotion for you, how did you manage for that? How did you share your feelings with others? Tell me about a time when you noticed a coworker experiencing a strong emotion. What did you do? Like you can dig into that, so you're hiring the right people first of all. And I think that's something that is underutilized. I'm always excited when an employer says, "Do you have questions?" And I'm like, "I have a couple." I'll toss you a few, because I think it sets the stage, right? Then do you have behavioral standards or norms that are consistent and they're upheld and people are trained on them and they're discussed? Because we say, we want collaboration. But then when I say, well, Jennifer, I really want to talk about this, you go, no. I'm like, well, that's not collaboration. So if we agree that this quality or skill is important to us, how do we integrate that into our everyday practice? Is it reflected in our values? Is it reflected in our goals? Can we tie emotional intelligence to the goals we're seeking? And they can be business goals, or they can be internal infrastructure or support goals, including things like employee engagement or retention. And the other thing that I was thinking about in relation to, the infrastructure is something that came up when I used to work in healthcare in doing organization development is, somebody would behave badly, it would be reported appropriately, and then the organization wouldn't do anything, or it would appear they didn't, which can look like behavior is getting rewarded that's not productive. And the behavior that people use to bring forward effective awareness may be unintentionally punished. And those are cultural behaviors. So you have to really be attending to that and be conscientious about those business decisions and be able to stand by them as business decisions.
Yeah, and that's certainly something, for compliance reasons, we encourage that those things be taken seriously, but that's just an additional reason to do the same thing, right? The benefits are many to take those things seriously, look into them, and if appropriate, take action.
Certainly.
Yeah, so talking not only about values and goals, but it does then again from a compliance perspective kind of circle back to policies, right? Like having the right reporting protocol so that if somebody does come forward with an issue like this, leadership knows what to do about it, how to respond. Because sometimes we'll get calls from employers who say things like, we've had this complaint come in, but it doesn't really feel like harassment or discrimination. We don't know if we need a full-fledged investigation. Help us figure out how to maneuver through that. And I mean, what I hear you saying is just that it's going to become more and more important to respond appropriately, effectively, quickly to things that go beyond the discrimination, harassment, retaliation piece.
Yeah. Any behavior, and you should be measuring and rewarding the right behavior, so it should be part of your performance management system too. If you're going to be doing something like that, it shouldn't be a lag measure, like, oh, for the last year you were really a jerk, that doesn't help people change. It should be a leading measure. If we're trying to achieve this organizational outcome, how would you developing these skills help us do that? And then you build in the practices and the training and the benchmarks that will help them recognize they're moving toward that outcome. And now your performance management system is an ongoing feedback mechanism rather than a once a year flagellation system. Yeah. I don't know how else to say it. That's probably not appropriate, but
regular coaching is what I'm hearing. It's what the terminology we kind of use in our world, but yeah. And there's probably different terms you can use for the same kind of thing, but regularly giving input, feedback, having discussions about how someone's doing on whatever goals they have at that time.
Yep. Yeah, and that's part of an emotionally intelligent culture, is being able to hear feedback and not take it personally, to be able to reflect on it. And you can grow these skills. That's the best part. That's why I really love doing emotional intelligence coaching and training. Is it is a competency. And there are skills related to emotional intelligence that you can grow. And so you can train it, you can practice it, you can learn how to manage yourself differently, more effectively, depending on the stimulus in the environment. You can practice it every day as you walk around, meeting people, walking through the grocery checkout line. Say nice things to people, see what they say back. Test, seems like you're having a pretty good day. Look at that big smile. Yeah, I'm having a great day. Yes, empathy, nailed it, right? And it's not touchy-feely, right? You're just learning how to apply these skills. And again, I just, anchor back to, it's simply using emotions as data, as information, my emotions and yours, to understand how I can more effectively navigate in the workplace and influence productively.
So this makes me think a little. We were talking about policies a minute ago, and I'm just wondering how, what types of policies can employers have to try to, ramp this up in the workplace. A lot of times we see policies that say things like, employees must behave professionally with one another, but we don't know what that means, right? And I think that there's a certain amount of conflict you can expect in every workplace, and you should maybe have a plan for dealing with it. But I don't know exactly what that plan looks like, so I wonder if you have any input on that.
Yeah. Well, in the human relations part of it, you're right. We're social creatures. We want to be a part of something bigger. And if that's not described to me, I'm going to seek to exercise control wherever I can. That's just human nature. I want to feel like I'm valued. I want to feel like I make a difference. So having policies that clearly describe what success looks like, that act as guardrails, and then practices and standards that are supportive of that or create the wholeness of that. So the policy is be professional. The practice or professional standard, which I've written with organizations, is when we say professional, we mean this. And that's where you build in your emotional intelligence responses and skills. So you're training to those specific qualities and behaviors. And the cool thing is, if you write it that way, that standard becomes something that can be shifted if the industry changes or if the organizational need changes, so that the standard can supplement, but it doesn't change the policy. And I think that's a really cool way to think about this work being enlivened and integrated without having to rewrite your whole manual. That's one thought that comes to mind for me immediately. The other thing is that policies should be written for our success, not for punishment. And so to look at policies that are integrative rather than kind of pushing people out, do they really account for the wholeness of diversity of thought and diversity of views? If they're not, they may be creating risk for you. So when people behave in ways outside of what you would consider normal, you might actually be doing some small harm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thinking about what you were saying earlier, really, it's got to come from the top, and your top level leaders are going to have to endorse incorporating. I mean, because, wow, we're talking about a lot of great ideas, whether it's hiring, evaluations, but clearly you're going to have your high level leaders modeling it and supporting it, or like anything related to culture, it's probably not going to fly.
Yeah. And it's always going to be a process. One of the things that I think is interesting about emotional intelligence and executive leaders in particular is there's some data that shows that as leaders advance in their professional power, their emotional intelligence starts to skew in some areas. So their optimism gets higher and their empathy gets lower. And if they already have some behavioral tendencies that are strong, those get heightened. And so it's really bringing this information to executive teams and helping them recognize that could be creating potential risk is simply creating awareness. So that's why I like doing, for example, like the emotional intelligence assessments and 360s, because then I can just say, well, this is how you see yourself and this is how your team sees you, and there's a difference. And if you really want to influence people, what are some ways you can adjust your behavior so that they experience you as you intend? And so that's an ongoing dialogue, right? But it also starts with a leadership team willing to say, oh, we need to look at this. We want our organization to manage differently and more effectively in this area.
Yeah, that made me think. We frequently get asked by clients, what do you recommend for evaluations, right? We're talking about making sure this is incorporated into part of a regular type of review. Like, what do you like to see? And you talked a little bit about 360 reviews right there. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you like to see, and what do you see with businesses or entities who are kind of adopting some of these emotional intelligence concepts and implementing them throughout their workplace? What types of evaluation protocols do they use to make sure their leaders are getting the input they need to take their emotional intelligence to the next level?
Yeah. When I talk about performance management, so often it's like, did you achieve your 30% increase in yada, yada by X date and time, like a SMART goal? Emotional intelligence, interestingly, can also be measured through goal setting. I will be holding one-on-one meetings with each of my team members twice a month, once for performance on job, once on their own professional development, so that I can coach more effectively using these qualities or skills. And so it's very targeted behavior that helps them elicit from those around them and those that they lead the outcomes that they want. So formal standards and practices that help them practice the skills and abilities. You can use your emotion and employee engagement scores. One great question is, senior leadership consistently shares our values and goals is one that's sort of a question that you might hear. Well, if they're not being expressed behaviorally, then the answer is going to be no. So then tying out emotionally intelligent behaviors to your values. Well, one of them is service. One of our values is service. What does that mean? Well, we serve our clients. How? Behaviorally, what does that look and feel like? And integrating those very specific behaviors into the standard, and then training to that. Making sure people are staying up on their training, and managing for things like retention or turnover. Those are all great measures of whether the work is sticking. It should also be part of your onboarding. And really, if you think about it, the entire employment life cycle, from pre-hire through onboarding, hiring, development and advancement to separation. Every aspect of it should be an emotionally intelligent endeavor, because it's a human you're dealing with, not a widget.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you seeing employers with, curious what the training looks like? Is all of it done on a one-on-one with an executive type of basis? Or are you seeing, when we do training, sometimes we get called in to a room of 50 people, let's talk compliance and let's go through this with your supervisors. Are you seeing employers training entire rooms of supervisors with a set
specific curriculum?
Yeah. Tell us a little bit what that looks like.
Yeah, there's layers of training that you can do. You can do individual coaching on emotional intelligence, which is the area that I work in. Which is a very in-depth program to help elicit long-term behavior change. So it's weekly, it's one-on-one. It involves a 360, an individual, a self-assessment and 360 assessment, and what I call an environmental scan. So I actually talk to other people in the organization, not just the leader, to find out what it's like to work there, because we're not very good at self-assessment, frankly. And so you need all the data points to create a real understanding of what's happening in the environment. Then, there's team coaching or group coaching. I'm a huge fan of group coaching. So you can do team coaching, which is about team behavior, but group coaching is taking a group of peers taking them through a training, a 2-hour training, and then having them meet once a month and say, so last week we talked about the concept of emotional self-awareness. Where did you express that? How did you learn it? How did it work? And then they talk about it. Because in any group of people, you're going to have a variety of skills in an area, both in understanding and application. And just you saying to me, I did try that. It didn't work for me. And me being able to say, this is what I did. And it was interesting, right? So group coaching, which is a really cool intervention. On the training side of it, this is all skills, like I said, that can be trained. So it's literally a training program. It depends on the depth that you want to do and the breadth. So you can do self-leadership around emotional intelligence, which is emotional self-awareness, emotional self-management, recognizing the schema or stories you tell yourself so that you can rewrite those, eliciting more healthy responses, and then doing some practical application around assertiveness and self-compassion. Like that'd be like my bucket of self-leadership. Then you can push that out to other leadership, which includes the concepts around conflict management, which again, that phrasing always kind of wigs me out a little bit. It's more like it's just people dealing with people. It's not conflict, right?
See, we're totally comfortable with conflict. We're like, that's what we call it. Yeah.
It is. I mean, that's how people experience it, right? But when it's you against me, it's very hard for us to come to understanding. If it's you and me trying to figure out what that is, now we're in a dialogue, and that's a very different feeling, right? A very different experience. And so how do we manage what we perceive as conflict, interpersonal or task-based, right? There's different ways to think about conflict. How do you interact with your team? How do you ask for help? How do you motivate? How do you delegate? How do you measure success? Those are the things you can do in a group. And then you can expand the concepts of emotional intelligence to organizational behavior, like we talked about values or performance management systems, goals that include emotionally intelligent responses to drive business outcomes. So it kind of depends on the layer of leadership you want to work in or the breadth and depth you want to drive the outcomes. At the very least, and this is without exception, when I do a simple assessment or even a very brief class, once awareness is raised, behaviors change. And just helping people see, first of all, everyone experiences this stuff, so you're not alone. It's a common attribute of humanity, and it's biological. You're not bad because you feel. You're human because you feel. And recognizing that it's biological makes it normal.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking about, like, I think there's various versions of this out there, but this book called Crucial Conversations. There we go.
Good stuff.
Right. But I have to tell you, even though I've read that book, I still don't fully understand how it is supposed to work. It is like a math theorem version of like a conversation. And I always think like it feels like there's so many nuggets of helpful things in there. If I could just figure them out, and maybe what you're talking about is maybe it just needs to be a little different perspective, I guess, to kind of make it make sense for me. But anyway.
I love that. I'm actually a certified Crucial trainer, or I was years ago. And so I'm a huge fan of their work. The third edition is fabulous because they've added virtual environments and some other qualities of workplace complexity. One of the things I always told people when I suggested they read it is read the first 5 chapters, there's a little self-assessment, and then don't read the book. Because this is something that we're not very good at in organizations either. We think that feedback has to be corrective. But what I've found is strengths-based coaching is far more productive. And if you're good at a skill, don't read that chapter because it'll confuse you. You're already good at it. You do innately. Access that natural skill and apply it more intentionally. So if you're really good at something like mastering my story, which is a part of that book, which has to do with that internal dialogue we have about what does this situation mean and the emotion that it elicits, if you're good at that, don't read the chapter. It'll confuse you. Instead, focus on the things you're really good at. And that's the other thing about 360 feedback is, right, you're really good. All of us already are emotionally intelligent. We wouldn't be functional. You wouldn't be sitting here dressed in a professional position influencing people. You have the skill. It's just recognizing it and then applying it intentionally. So that's how I think about it.
You make it sound so simple. And I'm sure it's really not. But I have to say, it's a little different than what I thought it might be when you hear emotional intelligence, and it sounds incredibly useful and valuable thing to focus on for individual people, leaders, but for organizations.
It's hard, but it's not complex. It really is. Like, it's pretty much just how do you and I come together and recognize that we're both feeling and do with that information something that's productive for the organization instead of destructive. Yeah. Here's something else to think about, serving the whole or other instead of serving self first, which is not a natural human response when feeling stress.
Yeah. It's how we teach kindergartners too, right? I mean, that's what I think about. Like, oh, you're feeling this. They're feeling this. Let's work it out.
Right? We learn all of this stuff, and then it's taught out of us because it's not rewarded.
Yeah, I was just thinking we talk a lot about empowering your supervisors to spot issues. It's like one more issue, right? That one is not typically on the list, but are you emotionally intelligent? Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I think we could probably sit here all day and pick Michelle's brain. Yeah, that is a lot of really good info. And as we've just unpacked, it flows into everything from hiring to evaluations to training to policies. Like you said, pretty much every single step on the employee, lifeline of, time with your entity. So really good stuff to think about. Michelle, thank you for joining us today.
Such an honor. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a joy.
Yeah, great stuff. Good stuff for everyone out there to think about and figure out, is this maybe something you want to work into your goals for 2026? I think as we all look at the culture out there of, maybe tense workplaces, people feeling disconnected, it seems like now might be the perfect time to incorporate concepts like this.
There's data right now that shows that emotional intelligence has decreased year over year since COVID. And it is time because we live both in our workplaces and our world in a almost chronic state of fight or flight now. So I can't agree with you more now. Is more than ever for us to be able to work together as humans is so critical, to be together as humans. Thank you.
So Michelle, if someone's listening right now and they're thinking, I've got to talk to Michelle about how I can incorporate some of the emotional intelligence training and concepts into my workplace, what is the best way for listeners to reach you?
The easiest way is through my website. It's www.michellechoate, MICHELLECHOATE.com, michellechoate.com. Perfect. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. That's a great way to connect.
Great. Okay, thank you, Michelle Choate. We'll see you next time on Ground Rules.
Ground Rules hosts and guests are not providing legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction.